Hi dancers, I'm Veronica and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about what is stopping your grand battement front from getting higher. And we're going to talk about it in regards to flexibility of the hamstrings complex. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to my channel with the button below because I post a new video every week. So let's first talk about passive insufficiency. Passive insufficiency is when a muscle crosses multiple joints in your body, like the hamstrings complex. So the hamstrings crosses your hip and your knee joint. So when you're performing a motion like a grand battement front, you're actually stretching the hamstrings at both joints. Passive insufficiency is when the muscle is lengthened to its fullest over both of those joints and it stops you from going into any further range of motion. Passive insufficiency is demonstrated really well with the hamstrings when you flex at the waist and you reach forward and you feel like there's a stopping point where you can't bend anymore because that muscle has been lengthened and it's taut to the fullest over both the hip and the knee joint. When your muscles are short and tight in the hamstrings, you're going to have a problem going forward all the way. So you're either going to be somebody who sits back and rounds their spine to get to the floor of your toes, or you're going to have to flex your knees in order to gain that range of motion. So go ahead real quick and hold your spine in neutral. Feet are parallel. Keep everything held and lift forward and see how low your hamstrings allow you to naturally go before you have to flex, sit back, or bend your knees. So now you've probably determined whether or not you have short and tight hamstrings, or you can go forward all the way and you have no problem at all. If you can go forward all the way with proper posture and you have no problem at all with the tightness and shortness of your hamstrings, then this video isn't for you. Go ahead and click out of it because you probably need to work on strength. Now, if you are short and tight through the hamstrings, then you're going to have a few problems with your grand battement front. When the muscle is lengthened through both joints and you're doing a grand battement front, people are going to feel the sensation of either wanting to bend their knee as they lift the leg up or flex forward at the spine to compensate for the height of the leg being low or the hamstrings being tight. Now, this can cause quite a few problems. Optimally, when you're doing a grand battement front, you want to have your spine in neutral with your core being held. Otherwise, it puts pressure on those lumbar discs and it opens the disc space, which we don't want. You also want to make sure that your knee is straight and your leg is lengthened through the entire joint. Okay, now, I've had people ask me this before. Why is my grand battement so low, but then I do an attitude swing in the front and it's much higher? That is because of that passive insufficiency that we talked about a little bit earlier. If you bend your knee in attitude front and you swing your leg up, you're only stretching the hamstrings at that proximal, that higher portion of the hamstrings. You're no longer stretching the hamstrings that cross behind the knee. So when you bend your knee, your hamstrings are on slack so they can lengthen up and you can lift your leg much higher. So just to repeat, if your knee is bent, you are not stretching the lower half of the hamstrings. So if you find that this is your problem and you're like, yes, this is my problem, now, how do I solve it? Okay, let's talk about how. First and foremost, how many of you dancers have seen a teacher or in class, they've been instructing you to do this hamstring stretch? There's a couple problems wrong with this hamstring stretch in particular. A lot of dancers who have tight and weak hamstrings or they have short hamstrings will rotate out, and again, they're going to round their back and they're going to try to inch their way forward by rounding their spine and compensating here. This is not truly stretching your hamstrings anymore. If you want to get a true representation of your hamstring length and get the actual stretch, you have to turn your foot parallel and flex the toes back. So both legs should be parallel, your hip should stay in its socket, and your spine should stay lengthened up to the ceiling and neutral and stretch forward. This, however, is not the first step that I would take in effectively stretching your hamstrings. Because your hamstrings are a multi-joint muscle crossing both the hip and the knee, you want to stretch the singular joint first, proximal, the closest one, and then you stretch both joints, the proximal and the distal. So the first stretch that you're going to do is just pulling the hip in and making the knee touch the chest. This is going to get the stretch of the glute, but it's also going to get that proximal portion of the hamstrings. The hamstrings originate right underneath here. So I want you to hold this stretch for 30 seconds and do it 3 times. Even if you do not feel like it's stretching you, I still want you to do it because it's going to create that length and get you ready for that multi-joint stretch later. Once you've completed your repetitions of 3 sets of 30 seconds in this position, then I want you to straighten the leg out. And it's very important that we keep our leg in neutral and we're not turning it out because you're not going to get the actual main hamstring muscle if you always are stretching and turn out. The other thing that you want to make sure you're doing is pulling those toes backwards. We want to stretch the back of the knee joint. We want that length between both joints. We don't want ourselves to be pointing our toes all the time because then that's going to contract the gastrocnemius. So we want this whole entire stretch through. If you can't reach your lower leg and keep good posture and bring it forward, we never want to put our hands on a joint. We want to always go above or below. Then I highly recommend you grab a stretch strap or even a towel so that you can pull the leg in until you feel the stretch on the back of the knee and the hamstring, and you're going to feel like you want to bend the knee, but I don't want you to get to that point. Take it to where you can hold it comfortably. Hold it for 30 seconds. Then you're going to bend it down and hold it against your chest in between repetitions, and then straighten it back up and hold it for 30 seconds more for a total of 3 repetitions on each side. You can also switch sides in between just to give the other side a break. So this principle of stretching a multi-joint muscle can be applied to any multi-joint muscle in the body. So it's always best to stretch the single joints first and then progress to stretching the portion that crosses both joints. I hope this has helped you understand how to, 1, effectively stretch your hamstrings, and 2, how it's going to play into affecting your grand battement and how it may be limiting your height and actually taking a toll on your posture. Please note that stretching your hamstrings is not by any means the only way that you can get your extensions higher. Extensions can be low also due to a lack of strength. It's always important to have a really great balance between strength and length in the muscles in order to produce safe and effective extensions. If you don't know how to get that strength and if you don't really know where to begin, I have an extensions course that you can try for 1 week for $1 on my Veronica K training platform. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below and stay safe and strong, and make sure you make cross training a part of your dance healthy habit routine.